Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from narcissistic relationships. Let's talk a little bit more about narcissistic siblings. Can having a narcissistic sibling harm you in the same way a narcissistic parent can? So please drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of yeses. So again, it's a couple sibling videos. So on my recent travels, a woman recognized me in a hotel lobby. She thanked me for the YouTube channel and thanked me for the content. But then she said, I could tell she wanted me to do something. And she said, could you please talk about narcissistic siblings? She felt that it was a very specific corner that often didn't get addressed, but it had such a strong effect in her life. And since narcissistic siblings in these relationships can certainly send shockwaves through a family system, there's no reason it can't have as much effect as having a narcissistic parent. And since it's not unusual for a person with a narcissistic sibling to also have a narcissistic parent, that this may be operating as a sort of double jeopardy for people having both a narcissistic parent and a narcissistic sibling. When I sat down to think about this, I was filled with the stories of the numbers of people whom I have worked with over the years clinically who have narcissistic siblings. And when I really started writing it down, even people I've worked with years back, I was like, wow, this is a lot of people. Then I realized there are people I'm friends with and even people I'm related to, not me. I adore my sister. So no, this isn't about you. She's watching. But it was far more common, this idea of narcissistic siblings, than I was thinking. And because the narcissistic partner, narcissistic parent conversation often grabs our attention, we forget how often the narcissistic sibling is an issue. Now, narcissistic siblings are a tricky issue to talk about because there can be so many variations. Birth order, gender, half-siblings, step-siblings, bio-siblings, the list just goes on and on. So part of it is focusing on some of the universals of a sibling relationship and addressing the issue in this video, which is, can the harms of having a narcissistic parent and a narcissistic sibling be similar? Now again, some of this can relate to birth order. If the narcissistic sibling is an older sibling, then yes. One tell on a narcissistic sibling, they were not happy when you were born. Again, assuming that the narcissistic sibling is older. They were not happy. I've never heard of a situation. Person had an older narcissistic sibling, then the person was born and the narcissistic sibling was pissed from that little age. And in almost every case where there was a living adult relative or parent, and in a few cases there was literally video evidence, or a story like of the narcissistic sibling crying, or a story that the narcissistic sibling wrote about how much they don't like the new baby. Where lots of siblings may have a little suspiciousness about a new baby, there's also often a lot of welcoming and excitement about a new baby. Narcissistic siblings are not happy about an interloper, as though their little selves were already gearing up for needing supply and not liking competition for attention, that kind of thing. I mean, babies are always going to get the most attention. It mattered most in two-child homes, or when you were the next born after the narcissistic person. But no matter what, they did not like you coming in as a new baby. And the early discourse when you have a narcissistic sibling, it's competitive. And this would often then devolve into meanness. Again, assuming you're the younger sibling, manipulating that you as the younger sibling to their point of view, to do their bidding, to engage in activities that were not safe or would get you into trouble, or making you the fall person or the fall guy for the bad things that they did. In a similar way, the way a child tries to attach to a narcissistic parent, somebody with a narcissistic older sibling may try to do the same thing attached to that older sibling, and as a result may internalize blame and be encouraged by the narcissistic sibling to do that. And then you, if you have a narcissistic sibling, may be willing to take the blame for joint activities where something went wrong to protect and perhaps ally with the older sibling. The drive to belong, to feel accepted, and to feel close to the older sibling can be quite strong. And it can start unfolding in a trauma-bonded way. And this can be really compounded if you were a good-natured child. You may remember fights and arguments and the like, but then you may also remember terrible days that were stressful and upsetting. But the overarching theme was to want to be close to this sibling, no matter how bad they were to you. And yes, all siblings fight, but those siblings that go on to full-scale narcissism, even in childhood, it was something far more nefarious throughout your childhood. And those of you who have multiple siblings, you have one sibling, maybe more, but at least one who grew up to be narcissistic and others who were not narcissistic, you may recall that, yes. But when you argued, that the arguing felt different and probably more severe with the narcissistic sibling. And yes, you can become trauma bonded to a narcissistic sibling, regardless of whether or not you have a narcissistic parent. And some of this can become much worse, depending on family roles. For example, if the narcissistic sibling is a golden child, and you had more of a scapegoated role, then you were being harmed in multiple ways. We cannot undo our childhoods. They happened. And frankly, we do not call children narcissistic because personality is still developing well into your mid-20s. While you can look backwards, though, you can definitely track the toxic person and someone who ended up as an adult narcissist. One survivor shared with me how his brother, ultimately narcissistic brother, regularly put him in extremely dangerous circumstances. And he looks back and says it was by sheer luck that he survived. He's a father now, and he shudders at the thought of his son being put in any circumstances even somewhat similar to what his brother did. But he also recalls his brother gaslighting him. And obviously he had no idea what that was, and calling him all kinds of names, implying that he was weak and a loser if he didn't do the dangerous thing. So it was all manipulation and gaslighting. And then when the man got hurt from these stunts his brother was making him do, his mother would criticize him and not the brother, who then claimed, the narcissistic brother would claim that he tried to talk his younger brother out of it, and the mother believed him. Now, culture can also matter. And in cultures where brothers are often given more power simply because they're male, regardless of where they are in birth order, they may take, for example, a controlling role in a sister's life quite early and already opining on her limitations. And in these cultures, boys are more often the golden child. So an elder brother in particular may have a permanent free pass to be as abusive as he wants. And in fact, the others in the family system may view it as a brother taking a preordained role in telling his sister or sisters what to do. That controlling behavior will often persist through a lifetime. I've seen like 85-year-old brothers still doing it to their 70-something-year-old sisters. But most of you are watching this as adults and not sure what to do. First of all, you have to recognize it's real. Sibling narcissistic issues and abuse are real. And it can be confusing because if there are more than two of you, more than two siblings in a family, you may have some siblings that are narcissistic and some that are not. You may or may not have had a narcissistic parent or have a narcissistic parent. Probably you do have one, but not definitely. And your parents, who may not see it clearly and are interested in maintaining the status quo or the illusion of a happy family, may enable this narcissistic sibling. Keep in mind, too, that when it comes to any family money, inheritance, estates, trust, any of that, or even family business, the narcissistic sibling will feel as though they have a disproportionate right to weigh in those matters, feel entitled to more of that pie, and will triangulate and tell the parents negative things about siblings to position themselves better around family assets. They may also feel that they have more of a right to weigh in on the health or the care of aging parents, and in many cases, they won't lift a finger, but feel that they have the right to offer up all kinds of suggestions to the siblings who are doing the actual work of managing the elderly parent or parents. But the original question was, can the harms of a narcissistic sibling be as bad as the harms of a narcissistic parent? And as I play out the myriad stories I have heard, the answer to that is a loud yes. Because siblings, unlike partners or colleagues or friends, were part of your developmental history. They were there as you grew up. Even if they were younger, they were there, and they were a developmental influence. And some of your early working models of trauma bonds may have been multiplied by the presence of a manipulative, entitled sibling who turned into a manipulative, entitled, narcissistic adult, and magnify any existing trauma-bonded relationships with your parent or parents. In the cases I have heard, the siblings' gaslighting was often worse and believed by other adults who viewed it as sibling squabbling, and the entitled, selfish, and cruel sibling would repeatedly remind you who's boss and that they would get away with it, and they often did. And in some cases, the sibling abuse you experienced may have been more severe. And many times, when a person is experiencing emotional abuse from a sibling, it goes unseen and not intervened in because it's often just written off as siblings being siblings. In adulthood, your tangles with a narcissistic sibling may be just as bad as your conflict with a narcissistic parent. And the presence of a narcissistic sibling may make, for example, attendance at any kind of family function really difficult, especially if your narcissistic sibling is really firmly wedged into the family system. Many people share with tremendous grief how they gave up on attending as many family events as they did and missed out on relationships that they actually valued with other family members just to avoid the narcissistic sibling. And families, as we know, are really funny, and not funny, haha, but funny in how they enable. And even the folks you like may look at you sideways and be willing to say, oh, come on now, that's who they've always been. Can't you figure out a way to get along with them? You become the problem for pointing out the problem. And nowhere is that more pronounced than in narcissistic sibling relationships. So those of you with narcissistic siblings, drop it in the comments if you feel comfortable. Because listen, given how many people out there are in intimate relationships or marriages with narcissistic people, or work with narcissistic people, or are friends with narcissistic people, or were raised by narcissistic people, unless they are all only children, they are someone's sibling. In a way, some people may not pay as much attention if they could move away from a sibling or distance from them, because that might be easier than from a parent. But since narcissistic siblings often have built-in supply and enabling and emboldening from a family of origin, they often stick close to that system. So these relationships can become very problematic if you still remain close to or have contact with your parents. If this is you and you have a narcissistic sibling, don't doubt yourself. And I'll continue to make videos and have more content to break down the strategies you can use to manage these relationships. These relationships can bring up so much grief, especially if it was just you and a sibling, just two-child home, because your sibling is often the only person who had that shared experience with you in childhood. And the grief over this loss, as well as ongoing grief, as they may interfere with your relationship and your parents and other family members you care about. And also how the voice of your sibling and the negative talk you internalized may be just as powerful as that of a narcissistic parent. So stay tuned, and thanks again.